Okay, guys, good morning and welcome to another session by Pasarkita. We are live now in YouTube. So today, we are honored to have Dr. Ghulam to join us in this meeting. So Dr. Ghulam will talk about the quality of soil. Okay, guys, good morning. And so for those who don't know Pasarkita, Pasarkita is a platform that helps grower to sell their products directly to consumer. So what Pasarkita do is we will help the growers, urban farmers to start their agriculture business. We guide them and provide trainings and equipments for them to kickstart their business. And once they have their harvest, we will market their products, their crops to the community. So this month, Pasarkita has a program in Launch Good that helps to get donation from the public so that we can provide the necessary tools and trainings to help onboard new growers. I will share the link in the chat box later. So feel free to help us to spread the news and help us to help more people. So without further ado, I will pass the mic to our honorable guest, Dr. Ghulam. Dr. Ghulam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Doctor, loud and clear.
Okay, I'll start now. Assalamualaikum. Good morning. Today, I'm going to talk more about soils than about business because I'm a soil scientist, and I would like to discuss a concept which I call the soil quality, because it is something that we will need to understand more in the near future, in the sense that towards producing enough food for the growing population of the world. As you know, we need to learn a little bit about what soil quality is, and also try to understand more about soils now, because we later on, people who use the soil will have to make decisions based on their knowledge of soil and how to improve soil quality. Because as you know, soil is a very limited resource. In fact, the world has used up most of the good soils that are available. And the growing population of the world will need to be fed and on the limited area of soils that we have today. So that is why I would like to discuss a little bit about soil quality, and then also introduce you to some of the important points in soil science. So Mike, can we have the first slide, please?
Yes, sure, Doctor. I will start sharing the slide now. Okay, can you all see the slide?
So I have called this
Yes.
talk towards better soil quality, because that is what our aim should be, not only here in Malaysia, but all over the world. Next slide, please. Next slide, Mike. As you know, one of the most important environmental issues nowadays is what we call global warming. And this is caused by the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Greenhouse gases include methane and carbon dioxide, and mostly released through the burning of fossil fuels and also by some agricultural practices. The greenhouse gases will cause an increase in the atmospheric temperature. And one of the most severe consequences will be the rise in sea level all over the world. We have been hearing and reading about icebergs and glaciers melting and flowing into the sea, increasing the volume of water in the seas and the oceans. So what will this, when this happens, what happens is what we will see will be the inundation of our coastal areas. The most vulnerable parts of our land will be the coastal areas. And if Mike, if you can go briefly to the next slide. Next slide. Okay. If you look at this map, you will see that in the coastal areas of Peninsular Malaysia, for example, are the places where we grow most of our rice. For example, the Muda Plain, the Barat Laut Selangor, and so forth. These are the main rice growing areas, and they are all very close to the coast with low elevation. So when the sea rises, these are the first places to be flooded with seawater. If you look at the names of the towns there also, you can see that most of the major towns in Peninsular Malaysia are along the coast. And the story is similar to in Sabah and Sarawak. The interior of Sabah and Sarawak are mainly mountainous. And if sea level rises significantly, then some parts of the whole of Borneo, for example, Malaysia, Indonesia, and all other countries in the world will be flooded with seawater. We don't know exactly when this will happen, but it certainly will happen in the near or far future. I don't know. So, Mike, can we go back to the previous slide? And scientists have projected that by the year 2050, the population of the world will reach 9 billion. And they have also projected that we have to produce food to feed this 9 billion to 2 times more than what we are currently producing. So the big question is, are we going to have enough good soils to produce all this food for the 9 billion people? And 2050 will not be far away. It's less than 30 years from now. As I said before, soil is a very limited resource, and we have nearly used up all the good soils. So our task will be now because soils are very prone to degradation if you mismanage them. So we have to manage the soils in such a way that there will not be any degradation. And so far, we also have many areas of soils which have degraded actually, and which are giving lower yields than before. And this, our task will also be to rehabilitate all these soils so that we will have the soils that we have will be able to help us produce enough food for the whole world. Next slide, please. Next. Next, okay. So let us start by knowing a little bit more about soils. We have to approach the understanding soils through biology, chemistry, and physics. All the important principles of these three subjects will have to be applied to soils. And normally, soil scientists will study soils through what we call soil profiles. That is the vertical cross-section of soils. And we will immediately notice that soil is actually made up of several layers vertically. And what happens in the lower layer will have a an effect on the top layer. Normally, the top layer is the most fertile and the one that has the best quality. But if we grow crops in the top layer, but the layer below it is very compact and does not allow water to flow down, then during rainy periods, water will accumulate and flood even the top layer and will adversely affect the performance of our crops. Another important point about soils is that it is a living thing. It is not static, always changing. And if we manage it properly, it will slowly, gradually improve, and it will provide us with the means to grow good crops. But if we mismanage, as I said before, there will be degradation, and its performance will be less than before. But there are many management techniques that we can use, and mostly, to me at least, is the addition of plant residues, compost, and increasing trying to help increase the microbiological activity in the soil. And also, when we talk about soils nowadays, especially about soil quality, then we have always to keep in mind the need for conservation and rehabilitation. Conservation for soils that are presently doing well, and rehabilitation for those that have been degraded or are being degraded. Next slide, Mike. Next slide, Mike. Mike, can I have the next slide?
Yes.
This is an example of a soil profile, that is the vertical cross-section of the soil. As you can see, you can immediately notice that there are several layers, horizontal layers, and the top one is very dark, and to me, it looks like it has good structure as well. But the one below it is not so good. It's pale in color. So this is what you normally notice for well-developed soils. Of course, there are soils which don't develop this distinct stratification or layers. And then people who study soils will be able to identify the different layers by taking samples and by analyzing the soil samples in the laboratory, in chemically and physically and biologically. The previous one, please, Mike. The previous one. Yes, this one. Again, here you see that the top layer is quite thick. It's about 1 meter. It's very thick, actually. And so this should not pose any problems if the lower layer is compact, or if it has some other issues that will not help plant growth. So because the top layer is sufficiently deep, then you expect less problems. But still, it must be managed in such a way that we can keep its quality like this for the future. Next slide, please. Next slide, Mike. And here is another example which also shows the distinct stratification or layering. But here, if you remember the previous slide, you have jumped it. You have jumped, Mike. The previous, this one. Yes, this one. That the top layer is not as dark as in the previous slide. That means in this soil, the top layer is not as fertile and not of high quality as compared to the previous one. But still, with good management, you can produce a good crop here. If we are talking about annual crops, which are very limited root system, then we don't have to worry too much about the lower layers. But if we are talking about trees, tree crops, rambutan, durian, jackfruit, and that sort of thing, then we need to ensure that the lower layers are also in good condition for plant growth. And in this talk, I will emphasize the need to rehabilitate degraded soils by adding organic matter in the form of plant residues, compost, and so forth. And I will also try to stress the importance of organic matter in the soil. And the management should, managing the soils, we should ensure sufficient organic matter is given to the soil from time to time, either in the form of plant residues, compost, or any other soil conditioner. Next slide, please. So, to my mind, a soil of good quality should possess properties that are useful for its intended use. So, if the intended use is to to construct a building, then obviously the soil quality should be different from if the soil is intended to produce food crops or what other crop that requires that requires us to grow plants or trees on it. And one of the most important things is it has to have sufficient depth, in the sense that if we are going to plant a tree, for example, durian, then we need a sufficiently deep soil for the roots to grow and proliferate. High fertility is something that is required for any venture that involves growing crops, either for food or for other purposes. And also, we need a soil in order for it to have sufficiently high quality that has a significant clay content. And this is of course something which we cannot do much to change, because it's already there. And I might as well tell you that in every soil, the major mineral components are clay, silt, and sand. Clay is the finest of the three and the most reactive. And that is why if the soil doesn't have a relatively high amount of clay, then it will be considered as difficult to improve its quality. Another important point as far as the soil quality for growth of plants is good soil structure. Soil structure can be developed, can be improved through our own management practices. We should always bear in mind the need to give organic matter, sufficient organic matter to the soil in order to improve its soil structure and hence its quality. Next slide, Mike. Next slide. I did mention that from the physical point of view, the soil should be sufficiently deep because we need sufficient space for the root system to develop. So if it is a tree, for example, rambutan, then its root system will be much larger than vegetables or, has other herbs and so forth. So if the soil is not deep enough, then if it is just like 4 or 5 inches deep, then it's probably not suitable for trees. If you want to plant a tree there, then you have to bring soil from somewhere and create a mound of a few feet high, and then you should plant trees. A good soil structure will determine how much pore space will exist in the soil. And this is related to how the soil particles, the individual soil particles, the clay, silt, and sand, react together to form aggregates. Aggregates are combinations of different soil particles to form larger particles. Sometimes these aggregates are referred to as secondary particles. Why do we need sufficient pore space? Because, as I will show later, the root system is the most important part of a plant or a tree. And it needs pore space because it needs air and it needs water. If the soil is compact and made up of individual particles of silt, sand, and clay, then there will not be any pore space, and the airflow and water flow within the soil will be restricted. And also, of course, the roots will need to grow and proliferate, because one of the functions of the roots is to take up nutrients, water, and other requirements for its growth through the roots and up into the foliage to produce fruit or leaves and whatnot. Another physical aspect is, as I mentioned before, the texture, which is the proportions of clay, sand, and silt, which we can't do much to change. But in every soil, if there is no clay, then it is difficult for aggregates to form, because clay is the most reactive, as I said before, and it is essential in the formation of aggregates. It will combine with the other particles, the sand and the silt, to form aggregates of various sizes and shapes. Clay is also important in nutrient retention. That means if you apply fertilizer to the soil and there is not much clay in the soil, then most likely the nutrients in the fertilizer will just leach through when rain comes, and you will lose those important nutrients which you have bought and applied to the soil. Next slide, please. Next slide, Mike. We will now look at the chemical and biological aspects of good soil quality. Of course, in every agricultural endeavor, fertility is the most important thing, because the plants that you grow will need the nutrients. For example, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and so forth. There are many, many nutrients, major nutrients, as well as micronutrients, depending on the type of plant. Different plants will require different nutrients in different proportions. And from the biological point of view, as I have already said many times, it should have a high organic matter content. If the soil that you come across do not have yet organic matter, you can over time manage it in such a way so that its organic matter content increases. Because organic matter not only important in the release of nutrients to the roots, but also in the formation of soil aggregates so that the structure improves. And most importantly, it is for the biological activity in the soil by the soil fauna and the microorganisms to operate, because organic matter is actually the food. The more organic matter there is, the more microorganisms and fauna will live there and will carry out their activities that help the roots of the plant to support whatever that you grow for. For example, you grow for the leaves or for the fruits. You need the help of these microorganisms and the soil fauna. Next slide, please. These are the two that we have to carry out because, as mentioned earlier, we need to improve the quality of our soils in order for them to provide us with the food, the all the things that we need to increase agricultural production, especially food production. Now, if you look at the soil from the top, that is without digging a pit or trying to look at the vertical section, you will see that where you have organic material, plenty of organic material on it or below it, then you will see that it is normally dark in color. The dark color indicates that the soil has organic matter. That means it has a significant amount of organic matter. And this is one step towards achieving high soil quality. And the indicators are the fact that you have fauna like earthworms and also microorganisms. But of course, microorganisms you can't see with the naked eye. But with this type of soil, then you will know that microorganisms are thriving there. And also you can see that the leaves, the dry leaves on the surface are in various states of decomposition. That means these fauna and earthworms and microorganisms have been working actively. And another feature here that you should observe is the fact that the soil exists in the form of aggregates of various sizes. It is not existing in its individual forms, the sand, silt, or clay. The, the, the organisms, whether microorganisms or soil fauna, have actually done their work to increase the formation of aggregates and also in the process, in their um, when they work on this organic matter, the leaf litter and the whatever you apply to the soil, compost or whatever, they have worked on it. That means they have made the nutrients available in those material to be in the form that the plant roots can absorb easily. Okay, next slide, Mike. Next slide. And if we look at a tree, for example, whether it's a big tree, nangka or rambutan, or a small plant, basically you have to realize that what you can see above the ground is actually the leaves and the trunks and the branches. And if they have fruits, the fruits, of course. But you can see that an important part of the plant or tree is actually below the ground, which is the root system. This is where all the action is, where the organic matter that you apply uh, provides the food for the fauna and microorganisms. And that's where they process all this organic matter and the nutrients in the form that is easily available to the roots to bring up through the trunk to branches to the leaves and fruits and flowers. This is the below ground is where the real action is by the fauna such as earthworms and by the microorganisms. They will be very active when you supply them with organic matter. And in the natural cycle itself, the leaves and the fruits and the flowers, after a certain time, will fall to the ground. And when they fall to the ground, they will undergo decomposition through the help of these microorganisms also, and through water from rainfall and so forth, and oxygen and so forth. So this is the natural cycle, nutrient cycle in a tree or plant. And this is the way also we should emulate nature to improve the quality of our soils by constantly adding what they require. They require nutrients, of course, and they require water. So we have to supply. If it is the dry season, we have to irrigate. And most of all, they require organic matter to improve physically, chemically, and biologically. Next slide, please. Next, okay. Here is the surface of the soil, and you can see that in this soil there is a lot of dry leaves. This is part of the leaf litter in the surrounding area, because the trees and plants drop their leaves when they are brown, and then when they fall to the ground, the fauna within the leaf litter itself, there are plenty of creatures that work on these leaves to decompose them, to release the nutrients, and to add organic matter to the soil. And if you can see at the bottom part, the soil is exposed after we sweep away the leaf litter. And you can see again it's dark in color, indicating uh, organic matter, and also that the soil exists in the form of aggregates. Aggregates, again, if there is sufficient organic matter in the right form, will become more stable. That means if the aggregates are formed, but they are not stable and they are easily dispersible into their individual particles, then they don't do their work well to improve the soil structure. These aggregates must not only be formed in different sizes and different shapes, but also must be stable against raindrops, against flowing water, and against uh, mechanical disturbance. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, Mike. And one of the important inputs that people give to the soil nowadays is compost. And I can tell you that there are many forms of compost, many ways of preparing it, and also add all sorts of catalysts and facilities and facilitators. For example, you can use very ordinary everyday stuff and form a compost in the right, if you know the right way. Because some people will regard this stuff, the peels of various fruits, as trash. It means they throw away with the rest of the rubbish. But actually, to me, it is a natural resource which you should make use of and turn them into compost, which then will be easily worked on by the soil fauna and the microorganisms to make them uh, provide the nutrients that the plants need, that the plants that you grow, whether in your farm, in your estate, or in your backyard, or in your garden, whatever. Compost is very important, and there are many different forms. There are many different ways of doing it. I just want to mention here that you can use everyday materials from your house to create good compost. Next slide, please. So from those materials that you saw in the previous slide, this type of compost can be produced. And as you can see, again, very dark in color, and you cannot easily identify the original forms of the fruit peels, and they have been converted nicely into a form that you can easily apply to your soil. You don't actually apply compost to the plants, you apply it to the soil because it will improve the soil, and the soil will help the plant roots to help in the plants to perform in terms of producing fruit, leaves, and so forth. Next slide, please. Next slide, Mike. Here is a farm which, to me, looks like have done a lot of work in trying to improve the quality of the soil now, and even probably help to improve, slowly, gradually improve the soil quality in the future. That means whoever owns this farm can produce a good crop now, and if he continues to, to plant, he will certainly get good crops later on. And hopefully this good soil that is a result of all this hard work will be available to the future, in the future, for people to grow food. If we have many of these type of farms, then we will certainly be helping to produce more food on the limited area of land that we have now. As you can see, this type of crop, they don't pull out the whole plant. They just cut the top part, and the bottom part is left on the ground, allowed to decompose. And then on top of that, they add compost in between the rows. And if you can see whether it's clear to you or not, I'm not sure, that the plant residues are left on the ground to decompose and add organic matter to the soil. And of course, there's an irrigation system to provide sufficient water for the growth of the crops. And also, it will help the microorganisms and soil fauna for their water needs. Next slide, please. Next slide. There are many materials that can be exploited to improve our efforts to produce fruits, and also to help at the same time to help improve the soil. And these are easily available in some places, and we should exploit them to the full. Because if you have a mulch of this sort in an area where the ground is almost bare, then you help to reduce the loss of nutrients and water through erosion and runoff. Because if you place them properly, then they will be able to slow down the flow of water and then deposit whatever soil has been washed away. And at the same time, these materials will decompose over time and add organic matter to the soil, and also provide food for microorganisms and soil fauna. And if you manage it properly, then you will get a good crop, and you will not, and you will also improve your soil, uh, improve your soil in terms of its fertility, quality, soil structure, and so forth. Next slide, please. This is one example of a relatively large farm where the practice is to intercrop different crops. Also, the same crop at different stages of growth, because they need to keep the soil covered with vegetation, and so that the microorganisms and soil fauna can thrive underneath. And then when they keep watering it, they keep the soils moist for it to continue to provide support for the various organisms that live in it, and also for the crops that they grow on it. And in some places, they even have grass strips, because grass keeps the soil active, in the sense that, again, soil fauna and microorganisms will thrive, and the grass roots will decay and then grow again, and decay and grow again. That gradually adds more and more organic matter through the decay of the roots. And also here you see that they apply compost, and also in some places, which you can't see here, the plant residues. Next slide, please. Am I taking too much time? Next slide, please.
No, Doc. It sounds very interesting, Doc. No worry, proceed.
So I just want to show you another example where they grow a shrub. Don't ask me what crop is this, I'm not too sure. But what I want to point out is that they have these grass strips in between the rows, again for the same reasons that I mentioned earlier. And also, for if the water were to flow in between the rows, then at least the grass helps to slow down the velocity of the flow. And also, again, you see that the leaf litter from the plants are on the ground. They're not washed away, and they're not swept away, because that the farmer here, I suppose, understands that that is a resource that should be kept, and allow it to provide the inputs, the nutrients that were in the leaves to the soil, and also the organic matter to improve the quality of the soil. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. So again, back to the fact that the soil is very dark under a cover of leaf litter, because this has accumulated enough organic matter to help to have all these organisms, well, these millipedes, and of course the microorganisms that we can't see with our naked eye, and also to show that the various the leaf litter, the fallen leaves, I call them leaf litter. They are in various stages of decomposition, because once the leaves are fully decomposed, then they feed the microorganisms. Microorganisms will multiply in number, and then those microorganisms will then work on the new leaves, even if they're still green, and the brown leaves. And so it's a continuous thing that helps you to gradually improve the soil quality. Okay, next slide. So what I have tried to highlight here is that we need to gradually improve the quality of our soils. Whether we are owners of big estates, or even a few acres in the countryside, or even if we just have a garden around our house, or even just a small patch in the backyard, everyone can contribute by not looking at plant residues as something that should be thrown away as trash. but something that we should return to the soil. And this also includes the use of compost on a regular basis as part of the farming system. Because we want to improve the quality of the soils through increasing its fertility and increasing its organic matter content, and at the same time also help to conserve the soils that are now still good, and also, if possible, rehabilitate all the soils that have been degraded either by soil erosion, acidification, salinization, loss of organic matter, or whatever. There are so many degradation processes that affect the soil, and these should be studied and measures to rehabilitate them should be found and applied. Also, again, I have also stressed the crucial role of soil fauna, like earthworms, like what do you call them, termites and so forth, and also the microorganisms. The microorganisms are responsible for so many natural resources that occur in our soil. And these natural resources should be allowed to go on unhindered because they are natural. That's how they are, that's how the earth, the soil is created. They need to be revitalized all the time through these natural processes, which we can't see, of course, because they occur under the soil surface. And at the same time, all these things not only increase fertility, but also the so this what I call a biological activity. There is the activity of the microorganisms and soil fauna by acting on the organic matter and with the soil materials. They help in the improving the fertility and structure, and they keep themselves occupied and they multiply. And those are the essential components of a soil of good quality. Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Doctor.
very much.
That was very, very informative. Now I can understand
Again, pardon?
in front of my house. Uh, so doctor, there are a few questions that we get from the floor. So
Okay.
before that, I would love to ask a few questions.
Okay.
For us, right, urban growers or urban farmers, we have our pots. We plant on our pots flowers or some herbs, etc. Right? So how do we introduce this kind of soil fauna into the soil? Because as you see, a lot of the soil that we buy from the
Yeah, again, I think
no,
again,
yeah,
organic matter is the answer. Compost or even plant residues. But of course, if your pot is too small, then maybe the processes will be quite limited. But still, no harm in applying organic matter. So, I mean, you have to use your judgment on the amount of organic matter. But you can,
okay,
like compost, you can prepare outside from ordinary household materials, and then you apply them to your pots. But of course, too much will not be good. But you have to learn what is the proportions required, the proportion of soil to compost and other things that made up to form your potting material. Okay.
Doctor.
Yes.
Mike, I
Doctor.
think your Mike, we are losing you, Mike.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that again, Mike?
Yeah. Okay. I was asking, is earthworm a good indicator of the soil quality? So what about other insects like, for example, ants or snails? Are they also indicating that the quality of the soil is good?
Earthworm is certainly a good indicator because I don't think earthworms bring any harm to the plants. But snails and ants, some people consider as pests. But if they are present in your soil, then that also indicates that there's something good in the soil. But of course, you don't want snails to destroy your plants. But as I said before, if you have a tree in your compound and the leaves fall and form a carpet of brown leaves, actually within that brown leaves, there are so many other creatures that act on those leaves. But of course, I can't name them all. But in the soil itself, earthworms is one of the good indicators of soil which has attained a sufficient level of quality. I can tell you that.
Doctor, there are some questions from the floor that ask about soil. So Mr. Gideon, he asks, how much does it cost to treat an acre of soil into a fertile soil?
Oh.
Is there any kind of indications or any suggestions how we can kickstart the whole treatment for the soil?
That is very difficult to give an exact answer, but depending also on what type of agricultural enterprise you are thinking of. Firstly, I think before we open up any area for use in agriculture, is to ensure that soil erosion is minimized. And this can be either through the use of cover crops or mulches. All these measures to reduce soil erosion not only help you to retain the soil there, but also to help to improve the quality of the soil. And then, of course, if you want to use compost, you have to prepare the compost depending on what crop you're thinking of. And also, as I showed you before, the soil profile, the top part is actually the most fertile and the most desirable part of the soil as far as the plant is concerned. So all efforts should be geared towards conserving that top layer. Most of the time, when people open up a large area of land to plant crops, whether oil palm or durian or whatever, they leave the soil, they clear the soil of the original forest, and then they leave the soil exposed to rain and sun and so forth. And this sort of makes the soil more sterile. It will drive away the microorganisms. And if you burn the felled trees, then obviously the temperature in the soil will increase, and the fauna and the microorganisms will either die or run away from there. So that is not a good way to start anything involving the soil. The soil requires inputs, not not their resources to be taken away. Okay, next question.
Okay, Doctor, we are already almost at 12 now. So there
That's
are a
right.
few more questions. Yeah. Most of them are related to indoor farming and how we can improve our soil, and how do we contact you to get more information on how to treat our soil.
I think you can email me. Email better. Phone sometimes don't answer the phone.
Yeah. Okay. So never mind. For we are already at the end of our this sharing session today. It's already 12. So thank you very much for Dr. Ghulam. We appreciate your time.
I have few questions from the floor. Just two more questions for Dr. Ghulam. So
great.
one of the question is, this is from our good friend, Madam Jennifer here. So she's unable to post any comment. So the question is it possible to introduce certain microorganism to reduce bad organism like nematodes and other root attacking organism? That's one. Can you answer that question?
Well, I think nematodes, as far as I know, there are some ways of treating nematodes so that they don't interfere in your crop. But I'm not sure whether you can introduce something else to replace it. That is something I'm not sure of.
Okay, the other question is, other than dollar and cent, is there any other way to contribute? Oh, this is for our side, is it? So, so any other way to contribute to launch good? Okay, at the moment from our side, the launch good is purely for us to get donation to onboard some of the growers, and also apart from helping the growers to kick off their own farm and even their own garden. So the funds that we collect also is actually to those that crops that we grow will actually contribute back to the needy people, especially for the kids. So these are the areas that we are doing right now. Having said that, in terms of money wise, if you have any other suggestions in mind, beside Logical, you can just contact us personally. So let's discuss offline and see how you can assist us in terms of to bring back and give back to the society. Is that okay, Jennifer? So I think that's it from our side right now. Mike, anything else, Mike? I would like to you first. Then
most important is I need to thank Dr. Ghulam for spending your time and sharing this very informative information. Okay, and to the members of the floor, you may subscribe to us and drop us an email. You can contact us via our website or follow us on social media. Okay, and please help us to share Launch Good campaign so that we can help more growers to onboard this urban farming business. And feel free to email us. I'll drop our email at the chat box in a while. So that's all from my side.
From my side, I would like to say thank you, Dr. Ghulam, for spending your time with us for 1 hour, even though it's on Saturday weekends, where you spend most of the time with your grandchildren. So stay safe, Dr. Ghulam, and wish all the audience stay safe too, and have a good weekend. And having said that, tomorrow we have another session about starting edible garden by Encik Rashidan, the president of this Kebun community under DBKL. So that will be an interesting topic to listen to. So you guys have time to listen to it. Tune us at 11 a.m. tomorrow. We'll keep update on our social media page. Okay. All right. That's it for me. Mr. Dr. Ghulam, any last words from your side?
Yes, thank you for inviting me and for providing the facilities for my talk. What I tell you only what I know. What I don't know, I don't say. Okay. So thank you very much, and stay safe as usual and stay healthy.
Okay. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.